Good morning. It is 7 o'clock. This is Sky News Breakfast. There will be plenty for Boris Johnson and Joe Biden to discuss later in Cornwall ahead of the G7 summit as the US president begins his first overseas visit. There's the resumption of transatlantic travel, trade, security, and of course, sausage wars, the row over the Northern Ireland Brexit arrangements. We'll speak to the International Trade Minister, Greg Hand, in just a few minutes. Also this morning, if Cornwall is too busy and too expensive, then could wild camping be the answer? We'll be discussing that with the father and son who've travelled across Britain pitching their tent for free. Also coming up.
He's on the floor.
So have a peep over the hedge.
Let's go round at some sheep.
Jeremy Clarkson takes a break from fast cars to run his own farm for a new TV series. He'll be chatting with us about how he coped with Brexit, climate change and coronavirus. It is Thursday the 10th of June. Tough talking. President Biden set to raise the Northern Ireland Brexit deal with the PM, along with trade, travel and climate change ahead of the G7 summit.
We're going to make it clear that the United States is back and democracies of the world are standing together to tackle the toughest challenges and the issues that matter most to our future.
At the heart of the action, Cornwall prepares for global attention and a bit of a traffic jam as the G7 leaders arrive. Also this morning, children sending explicit pictures and teachers underprepared. The damning report that's found sexual harassment is now normalised in British schools. Quizzed about coronavirus, the Health Secretary under scrutiny from MPs about his role in the government's response to the pandemic.
Good morning. We have more sunshine to come today. A bit of a grey start. Best of the sunshine will be in the east, staying a little bit cloudy in the west. But again, it's warm and it's going to stay warm right into the weekend. I'll bring you all the details later on. And remembering Prince Philip. The Queen is given a new rose named after the Duke of Edinburgh on what would have been his 100th birthday. Morning all. President Biden will be getting straight down to business when he holds talks with Boris Johnson in Cornwall today ahead of the G7 summit. On his first overseas visit since taking office, President Biden is expected to say the dispute over the Northern Ireland Brexit deal cannot be allowed to put the Good Friday Agreement at risk. The two leaders will also set out their joint vision for a new Atlantic Charter, working closely to recover from the pandemic. Our diplomatic editor Dominic Waghorn reports now from Cornwall.
He's a president on a mission to rally America's allies, to tackle some of the gravest threats the world has faced, landing in Cornwall with his words already ringing in their ears. In Suffolk, surrounded by the US military, Joe Biden had this uncompromising message for the alliance and its rivals.
At every point along the way, we're going to make it clear that the United States is back and democracies of the world are standing together to tackle the toughest challenges and the issues that matter most to our future. That we're committed to leading with strength, defending our values, and delivering for our people.
This is a president determined to dispel the doubts cast by his predecessor over America's leadership of the world.
To tackle this century's most pressing challenges, we have to do it together. We have to end COVID-19 not just at home, which we're doing, but everywhere. There's no wall high enough to keep us safe from this pandemic or the next biological threat we face, and there will be others. That requires coordinated, multilateral action. We must all commit to an ambitious climate action if we're going to prevent the worst impacts of climate change, limiting global warming.
It's taken the president 7 months to get out of America, but the same threat that's kept him at home will preoccupy him here. He's brought with him a promise to fund hundreds of millions of COVID vaccines worldwide. America will lead the free world again, say officials, tackling what they call the 3 Cs: COVID, climate change, and China.
Through there.
Ahead of the weekend's G7 summit, the President meets Britain's Prime Minister, who spent the day highlighting the UK's efforts to reverse climate change. There are points of friction between President and Prime Minister, Northern Ireland in particular, but observers say there's too much at stake to let any of that get between them.
This is a pivotal moment where we can either be working together to ensure that the future is not along the lines of China and Russia. And if we don't work together, then there's all likelihood that the world will look very different in 10, 15, 20 years.
Face-to-face diplomacy is back, first for the Prime Minister and President, then all G7 leaders meeting together. A lot has changed, though, since they last met. COVID, worsening climate change, the rise of China. It'll take unity and determination for the West to meet those challenges head-on. If it fails, rivals and autocrats are waiting in the wings. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News, Falmouth.
Pleased to say the Minister for Trade Policy, Greg Hands, joins us on the programme. Mr Hands, great to have you on the programme this morning.
Morning.
A busy few days pending. These presidential visits, always a little bit of glitz and glamour surrounding them. But at the heart of it, the announcement of a new Atlantic Charter. Tell us more.
Well, it's 80 years since the original Atlantic Charter launched by Churchill and Roosevelt. And that was all about the world pulling out of World War II and recovering and setting a roadmap for the world after World War II. This Atlantic Charter is all about recovering from the pandemic, joint action by the United States and the United Kingdom, particularly in areas of fighting the pandemic and future pandemics, working together on climate change, working together on security and cyber, and working together on guaranteeing the global rules-based trading system. So this is a big moment for cooperation between the United States and the United Kingdom going forward.
As you say, a big emphasis on transatlantic cooperation. A big issue at the moment is, of course, when we might see flights resuming between the two countries. Are we to take it that we're edging closer to that point?
Well, we're launching a working group together, the United States and the United Kingdom. This is one of the agreements that Prime Minister Boris Johnson and President Joseph Biden will be launching today. We'll be looking at how we can reopen transatlantic travel between the US and the UK. There'll be a working group set up, and we're looking as a matter of priority. It's such an important relationship for travellers, for families, for tourists, but also for investors. Every day in this country, 1 million people in this country go to work for US companies. In the United States, more than 1 million people go to work for British companies. It's very important that we get that transatlantic relationship reset up in terms of travel between the two countries as well.
We also know from reporting that President Biden is set to purchase 500 million doses of a vaccine to be distributed around the world. When do we think the British government might do something similar?
Well, look, the UK government, we're a massive contributor already to the COVAX programme, which is the global response to help developing countries get enough vaccines. We're a £500 million contributor to that from our aid budget. And worth remembering that a third of all jabs globally are being provided by the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, which, of course, has had a big part of that has been from investment from the UK government this time a year ago to make sure that vaccine is up and running, working closely with Oxford University and with AstraZeneca. So the UK is a massive part of that solution.
Can we talk for a second then, Mr Hands, about the situation which we know will be discussed between the UK and the US, and that of the Northern Ireland Protocol and perhaps any knock-on effects it might have on the Good Friday Agreement. The front pages of the papers this morning are reporting the fact the United States has issued something of a diplomatic rebuke. Is that the case?
Well, look, we agree with the United States. We agree with the fact there should be a negotiation. There is a negotiation between the United Kingdom and the European Union. And we absolutely agree on preserving the peace process and the Good Friday Agreement. It's a very important thing for the United States as well. Don't forget, the United States is a guarantor of the Good Friday Agreement. Senator George Mitchell, who is the US negotiator, is a Senate contemporary of Joe Biden. The US has played a big, big role in the Good Friday Agreement. We absolutely agree that preserving the peace in Northern Ireland, but to do that, does need a more pragmatic approach from the European Union in terms of how it interprets the protocol. And those were what the talks yesterday between Lord Frost and Maros Šefčovič were all about, was making sure that the protocol can work better to preserve the peace in Northern Ireland.
But as I understand it, at the meeting that took place yesterday between Mr Šefčovič and Lord Frost did not rule out the possibility of the UK unilaterally extending the grace period for Northern Ireland. In essence, Lord Frost failed to rule out not adhering to commitments that we have made in a treaty.
Well, look, the grace period is a matter of pragmatism. You know, when do you actually introduce the new changes? It's all about making sure that businesses and consumers are ready. It's all about making sure that peace is preserved in Northern Ireland. We've submitted some very serious proposals to Brussels about how to improve the situation. Talks are ongoing. They didn't get a breakthrough yesterday, but nor have they broken down. And exactly as we should be doing, we're talking with the European Union, trying to find a pragmatic solution to these very real issues facing consumers and businesses in Northern Ireland. It's a very, very important part of that peace process, is making sure that people in Northern Ireland, that their lives are not disrupted, making sure that businesses are not disrupted. That is a big part of preserving the peace in Northern Ireland.
But just to be absolutely clear, you are not ruling out unilaterally extending the grace period beyond the detail as set out in the protocol?
Well, look, we're continuing to talk with the European Union. It is urgent to find a solution because the current grace period expires shortly. We need to find that solution, and we need to find something that works well for everybody and make sure that businesses, consumers in Northern Ireland can continue to operate as normally as possible.
I suppose the problem that many people have is, well, Lord Frost said it himself, we underestimated the effect of the protocol on good movements to Northern Ireland, with some suppliers in Great Britain simply not sending their products because of the paperwork required. He didn't see it coming. The problem is that plenty of other people did, including people operating business in Northern Ireland.
Well, look, I think let's talk about what we're actually talking about here. We're talking about, you know, what is the actual threat to health in the European Union? That's really what the rules are supposed to be there. These SPS checks, they're called sanitary and phytosanitary checks. They're a big part of the world trading system. They're there to protect public health. So what actually is the threat to public health from sausages being moved from, say, Birmingham to Belfast to go to Tesco's or Sainsbury's in Northern Ireland? What is the threat to public health in the European Union? That is the sort of pragmatic issue there that we need to find solutions for.
Apologies for interrupting, but Minister, we once again find ourselves in a situation in which ministers of the Crown seem seemingly sanguine about perhaps acting unlawfully under our obligations at international treaty.
Well, I disagree. This is all about talking, negotiating to find a more pragmatic approach and making sure that we do not disrupt the lives of people in Northern Ireland. That is also a really, really important part of the Good Friday.
Why did we sign it in the first place then?
Sorry,
apologies, Minister. Why did we sign it in the first place then?
Well, look, it was signed at a difficult time for everybody, but we weren't, to be honest, we were expecting a more pragmatic approach from the European Union rather than a one-size-fits-all. Larne as a port is not the same as Rotterdam, and the EU is following a very officious interpretation of a lot of these rules. We are looking for a more pragmatic approach, which will help businesses, consumers in Northern Ireland, people to continue to have access to the products that they're expecting and have had access to for some time. That is the most important thing here, is actually the people of Northern Ireland in all of this.
To change topic just for the remainder of our interview, Mr Hands, Matt Hancock, of course, the Health Secretary, appearing in front of the Select Committee a little bit later on today. Key questions surround his handling of care homes. We know now that by August of last year, there were 30,000 excess deaths in care homes. Who is responsible for that?
Well, look, the situation in care homes is an absolute tragedy. My father died in a care home last April from COVID, so I know it at first hand. Ministers, there was a lot of advice from Public Health England, in relation to care homes that I'm sure will be examined as part of the public inquiry coming up. And I think all of these questions will need to be answered. But I don't think it should be laid at the door of Matt Hancock as to what happened at that time. But a lot of difficult decisions had to be made quite quickly last March and last April. But I personally am acutely aware of the situation.
Mr. Hands, a busy few days ahead for you, I'm sure, so we'll let you crack on. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, sexual harassment, online sexual abuse and sharing nude photos all becoming normalised, apparently, among Britain's school children, according to the UK's schools watchdog Ofsted. The organisation says that many students are not reporting this harmful behaviour and has warned that teachers are underprepared for the scale of sexual abuse among children. Our Home Affairs editor Jason Farrell reports.
Aged 15, Zan Moon was sexually abused by a schoolboy at a party. 9 years on, she's on a mission to stop it happening to others and feels schools have a part to play. After sharing her story on Instagram, she received dozens of similar testimonies and since then has been to meet with headmasters and this week was invited to the Department of Education.
So I'm going to go in and ask them to update the curriculum so that we have sex education as a standalone subject, that boys can be tested on consent. I think there needs to be more support and accessibility for victims so that we can easily come forward. And there needs to be a rehabilitation programme for the boys and the perpetrators so that when they offend, they're not just punished but educated.
Now the school's inspectorate is calling for similar changes after its investigation found sexual harassment was normalised amongst school children. In Ofsted's review, 90% of girls said that being sent unwanted, explicit photos or videos happened either sometimes or a lot. Sexist abuse was equally common, and it was often reported that boys collected nude photos of the girls and shared them on social media. The Ofsted review recommends that schools assume that sexual harassment is happening, even if they don't think they have a problem.
The main finding we're reporting is that sexual harassment, including online abuse of young people, is so widespread that most children are taking it just as commonplace, normal, even harmful sexual activity. And the second finding is that teachers and leaders in schools and colleges are just sadly often not aware of the true extent of the problem.
The founder of Everyone's Invited, the anonymous reporting website which led to this review, says all schools can do more to learn what's going on.
We believe at Everyone's Invited that there should be anonymous reporting systems available in all schools because we don't feel that we're there quite yet, that students and young people are feeling able to safely share their stories.
Helen Pike is master of Magdalen College School in Oxford, which was named on Everyone's Invited, and she welcomed the issue being exposed.
It's a very upsetting experience. I think it was a real moment of realisation and a window into some elements of teen life that had been troubling us for quite some time.
But she warns things need to be handled fairly.
As the Ofsted report really sensibly says, there is a danger of over-criminalising children, and some quite unfortunate demonising parallels have been drawn here. So I think we need to look at cultures and environments in which young people, and particularly boys in the example you've given, make unfortunate and sometimes illegal decisions.
The Department of Education says teachers will be better supported in the future to recognise sexual harassment and abuse and teach confidentially about issues of consent, online pornography and healthy relationships. Jason Farrell, Sky News.
Now, Cornwall will spend the next few days at the centre of international politics and diplomacy, as it, of course, hosts the G7 summit. Very few people who live there will get to see the leaders, but many will feel the disruption of such a major event. Dan Whitehead reports now from Cornwall.
For Cornwall's holidaymakers, there are some unusual sights at the seaside. Royal Navy ships patrol Carbis Bay as police zoom past on jet skis, while on the beach, military radar scan the skies. After months of preparation, thousands of delegates, journalists and police are here as the G7 summit begins. Are you ready?
Yes, we are ready. We've been planning this for months now. It's the biggest police and security event in England this year. So as you can imagine, we have big numbers to help us police this.
6,500 officers have come to Cornwall from every force in the country. 1,000 are having to stay on a cruise ship. The summit has turned Cornish coves into lockdown zones, with locals already feeling the impact.
It shouldn't have been done now because of COVID and the fact that they should have just held it on Zoom and did it that way.
My business is shutting down Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It's not going to work. We'll pack up Wednesday evening and then we'll come back on Monday.
Will you give Biden an ice cream if he comes?
I would. Yeah, and Boris. Yeah, they're welcome.
While there will be disruption, for some the summit is a sweet deal. The official G7 chocolate bar, made in the Cornish town of Wadebridge, had to get government approval.
Got an email first, just out of the blue, from one of the offices in Whitehall. They specified they wanted milk chocolate flavoured with sea salt.
COVID and climate change are top of the agenda here, both issues that impact this county.
The leaders of some of the richest countries in the world will be on this beach at the weekend, and it's thought the summit will bring in around £50 million into Cornwall. The question is just how much real people living here will actually see of that cash.
Camborne is 10 miles from the summit and one of the poorest parts of Cornwall.
I think it's just a quick flash in the pan of money. We won't get nothing out of it, I don't think.
Camborne and other places have got their problems, and I think the money could be better spent.
There are plenty of protests planned this weekend. The eyes of the world on all of these leaders as they gather in this corner of Cornwall.
Well, let's speak to Dan, joining us from Falmouth. Good to see you, Dan. And I'm told something of a test already for the police.
Yeah, absolutely. Police were alerted this morning at 3:15 to a hotel not too far away from where I'm stood in Falmouth here, the Falmouth Hotel, and had to evacuate it and put in a cordon. It was after a suspect package, not an unusual event for police, certainly at big summits like this. But as I say, it was a test for police. They had to evacuate 2 hotels, a number of people staying in camper vans. They were only let back into the hotel in the last half an hour or so. Turns out that the package was safe, although they do say it was a hoax and that a criminal investigation is underway. So a test for just some of the 6,500 police that are down in Cornwall. We are just next to the media centre. Behind me here is the cruise ship, which you saw in my report there. A fifth of those police officers are staying on that cruise ship, which came in from Estonia last week, because they're simply run out of hotel rooms in Cornwall and accommodation. So instead they're on this luxury cruise ship. The spa and 7 restaurants, I'm told, are fully closed. Over here is the media centre. So this is where the 1,000 or so media who are accredited will be coming and filing from organisations all around the world. That opens at 8 o'clock this morning. Cornwall really braced for a pretty manic couple of days. The road closures, importantly for the logos, kick in from today, and that will cause disruption, as we heard. People are, in some cases, shutting up their businesses. The police hope that the disruption will be minimum. For some, they are getting out of Cornwall or shutting up shop.
Dan, many thanks indeed. Still to come on the programme, the Prime Minister, of course, meeting President Biden ahead of the G7 summit in Cornwall. At 5:30, I'll be asking Preet Cargill, the Shadow International Development Secretary, what she's hoping to hear. The Duke of Edinburgh would have been 100 today. The royal photographer Arthur Edwards will share his favourite photos of Prince Philip at 8:15. That big meeting between the President and the PM. Can the two men agree when to restart transatlantic flights? Virginia Messina from the World Travel and Tourism Council will be here at 8:20. The Health Secretary Matt Hancock is due to give evidence this morning to a House of Commons committee investigating the government's handling of the pandemic. What can we expect? Well, let's ask our political correspondent, Rob Powell, on deck in Westminster. Morning, Rob. Well, I suspect it's going to be bruising to start with.
Yeah, I think the second big act, really, Neil, following that extraordinary session of evidence from Dominic Cummings, the former number 10 advisor, a couple of weeks ago. Matt Hancock will be speaking to the same group of MPs that Dominic Cummings gave evidence to, and you suspect a large number of the questions may well come off the back of some of those extraordinary accusations that Dominic Cummings made. He really, I think, amongst many targets, zeroed in on the Health Secretary, accused him of repeatedly lying, saying that he should have been fired on a number of occasions. I think one very important topic that you were touching on just then with the Trade Minister Greg Hands that will come up is that question of care homes. Dominic Cummings accused Matt Hancock of lying by saying that he had promised that everyone that went from a hospital into a care home in March last year in the early stages of the pandemic would be tested. And I think it's not just Dominic Cummings and people like that putting pressure on the Health Secretary over this. The last couple of weeks have seen care providers piling the pressure on as well. More revelations in The Guardian this morning with care providers saying that they repeatedly warned the Health Secretary about the dangers of not testing. I think the explanation you'll hear from Matt Hancock was that he said at the time that everyone would be tested if possible. But of course, testing capacity, the number of tests available was a lot lower back then. So I think to an extent you'll have a rehearsal of some of the arguments we've heard over the last fortnight. I think what will make today different, though, is that the MPs on this committee will have a number of hours to dig into detail with Matt Hancock. So they will be able to cross-examine him in a way that's really different from appearances in the House of Commons, from even interviews done on TV stations as well. And Matt Hancock is no shrinking violet when it comes to these matters, so it could be lively. Kicks off at 9:30.
I'll be tuning in. Rob, thanks very much. There will be full coverage of that committee hearing from 9:30 this morning here on Sky News. Also making the news this morning, the Foreign Secretary has criticised a ruling by a Russian court declaring organisations linked to the opposition leader Alexei Navalny as extremist. Dominic Raab described the decision, which stops any of Mr Navalny's supporters from running for office, as an attack on those standing up against corruption. Lord Ashcroft's daughter-in-law has been granted bail over charges of manslaughter in the death of a police officer in Belize. Superintendent Henry Jemmett was found shot dead on a dock last month. Jasmine Harton was charged the same day. Regulators say that fertility clinics must be clearer about their success rates and charges. The Competition and Markets Authority has issued new guidance which says that clinics will face legal action if they don't provide a comparison of their services with other companies. And today marks the 95th birthday of one of our great children's literary characters, Winnie the Pooh. A new cartoon shows Pooh with Piglet, Christopher Robin and friends travelling to Windsor Castle to deliver a present for the Queen, who, of course, shares Pooh's birthday. Time to check in, see how the weather's looking.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning. There is more summer weather to come, but it's a west-east split. Western areas will be somewhat cloudy. We've got a weather front moving in from the Atlantic, and that will bring more in the way of cloud. Also, a few spits and spots of rain. Quite a lot of low cloud mist and murk around the coast, especially for Wales and southwest England. But eastern areas, so even eastern parts of Ireland, Northern Ireland, and much of eastern Britain, that's where we'll see the best of the sunshine today. So a mild start and warm in that sunshine. We're looking at the high teens to the low to mid-20s, 25 anywhere, 26 even, in places from Hull down towards London. Strong sunshine, though. We hold on to the cloud a little bit further west, and we could see a few showers this afternoon across England and Wales, but most places should stay dry.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Kirsty, thanks very much indeed. Coming up, I'll be asking the Shadow Secretary of State for International Development, Preet Cargill, just exactly what she's hoping to hear from the G7 summit. That's coming in just a couple of minutes.
Oh man, I'm really, really proud of it. You know, a lot of people got lockdown puppies. I got a lockdown novel. I actually, you know, I owed my publishers a book, and there was no excuse. I was looking for excuses because it's quite hard to write a novel. But once the first lockdown hit, I realized there's no excuse. I've got the time. I've got nothing else to do. So I really knuckled down and got into it. It's you see it there on the screen now. It's a book for middle grade. So, you know, sort of 10 to 13-year-olds. It's a story about a 13-year-old kid with a very big mouth who ends up finding that infamy is not necessarily all it's cracked up to be. He risks his school place, his friends, his family to go it alone on a big adventure. It's a straight up comedy. I'm really proud of it. I think it's the best thing I've ever written, to be honest. I find it really, really difficult. You know, people who know me know, you know, I act, I do comedy, music. I like to do short things, jokes, songs, scenes, you know. This long form stuff, I find it really difficult to keep focusing on the same idea for so long. But I think the thing that inspires me is kids, man. Like kids, I just think are endlessly interesting. They're not as, I don't know, adults sometimes feel a little bit ruined as human beings. Kids are they're just great. They're so fresh, imaginative, creative, artistic, and they deserve the best. So I think I'm not going to undersell it. I'm not going to dumb it down. I'm going to make the best product for kids that you can make. That's the thing that keeps me going, I suppose. And I've also got my own kids who are constantly like, that's not funny. Kids wouldn't say that. So that sort of spurs me on.
Hello, my name is Nadia Frontier.
My name is Ryan Matthews. I'm the Marine Assistant at Rotherham Research Station,
which is to the west of the West Antarctic Peninsula. So far I've been here for 5 months and it is an absolutely wonderful experience.
My name is Fatma Zilzila, the founder of Ikisa from Kuwait, where we face many environmental problems related to waste pollution, deforestation, and lack of information. We are collecting recyclables from houses, schools, and businesses in order to recycle them. In exchange of your recyclables, you get a treat.
Welcome back. The government says it's hoping for a more pragmatic approach from the EU to the Brexit trade negotiations. Under the current terms of the Northern Ireland Protocol, a ban on the trade of sausage and processed meats will come into force if the UK and EU cannot agree new regulatory standards. Well, in the last few minutes, the Trade Minister, Greg Hands, said despite the pressure from the US President not to jeopardise the Northern Ireland peace deal, he hoped an agreement could be reached.
The US has played a big role in the Good Friday Agreement. We absolutely agree that preserving the peace in Northern Ireland, but to do that does need a more pragmatic approach from the European Union in terms of how it interprets the protocol. And those were the talks yesterday between Lord Frost and Maros Šefčovič were all about, was making sure that the protocol can work better to preserve the peace in Northern Ireland.
Well, let's speak now to Shadow International Development Secretary Preet Cargill. Good to see you this morning, and a busy few days for politicians, particularly those in government. What do you want to see emerge from the G7 summit taking place in Cornwall?
Well, as you said, President Biden is going to be meeting with Boris Johnson, and I think this is really an opportunity for the Prime Minister to get back on the front foot and really rebuild what is termed as a special relationship with the United States. And I think the Prime Minister should have three clear priorities. And the first, he's got to really make a cast iron guarantee of the UK government's continued commitment to the Good Friday Agreement. As you've heard, I know this is going to be something very important for President Biden. And secondly, he's really got to end the sort of attempt that we've seen from the Chancellor to water down global tax reforms. We've seen the ambition from President Biden and the G7 countries, and it's a shame that we haven't been at the forefront of wanting a global fairer tax system. And then thirdly, I think, He's got to reverse his aid cuts. There's been criticisms from all corners of the world, including the Biden administration and the US Congress, because we know that this is signalling a retreat in the year that the government is going to be tested on its leadership on the G7, on the Global Partnership for Education and COP26. It's really important that it maintains its own credibility. And I think these are going to be some really interesting negotiations at the G7 summit.
But just in terms of the Good Friday Agreement and indeed the effect that the Northern Ireland Protocol and our government's actions may well have on it, do you share any of the frustration of government ministers that sausages produced in this country since time immemorial should somehow not be seen as fit for moving from Great Britain to Northern Ireland?
Well, I think, it's obvious that the collapse of trust in the Prime Minister across many of the communities in Northern Ireland is really a result of him promising communities that he would not be placing any barriers down the Irish Sea. And what we've actually seen is the opposite. He's got to find practical solutions. That's what being in government and being in leadership is. He's got to reduce that sort of friction down the Irish Sea, which has been caused by the protocol. 1/5 of all border EU checks are now carried out in Northern Ireland. We've really got to find solutions. Both sides have got to be willing to come to the table and compromise. And I think that's what President Biden surely will be pushing Prime Minister Johnson to do.
But in what way is it not hyperbolic to suggest that moving sausages from Great Britain to Northern Ireland somehow risks the peace that exists there?
Well, I think it's as a result of, as I've already said, the deal that the government negotiated. And I thought that, they obviously thought that they had a ready deal and that this could be changed at any point. It isn't going to be difficult. But I think, on both sides, what we've got to see is practical solutions. How do we overcome the issues that Northern Ireland that the government has created in Northern Ireland, because it hasn't been offering practical solutions. It hasn't been really understanding the level of feeling across Northern Ireland. I think it's really, really important that we find the solutions. Unfortunately, talks haven't been positive, as we saw yesterday. And really what we need to see from the government is practical solutions.
I mean, the word of the interview between myself and Greg Hans was pragmatic. Practical appears to be yours. So what is the practical, pragmatic solution to all of this?
Well, you've got to have civic society, business leaders and political leaders all part of that consultation on the Northern Ireland Protocol, feeling that they've actually got a say and that they are being listened to and being heard. That's what leadership is about. It's about bringing people together, being able to resolve those issues. They're not going to be easy. I appreciate that. That means that both sides are going to have some compromises, but this is what you would expect from our Prime Minister, is actually to bring both sides together and to find those practical solutions, especially ahead of the G7 summit, when it knows that this is an important issue for President Biden and he would want us to seek to resolve this.
Preet, Cargill, good to see you this morning. Thanks for being with us. So, the first major announcement ahead of the G7 summit is America's pledge to provide 500 million vaccines for the world's poorer nations. And our Africa correspondent has seen evidence of just why it is so badly needed. More than 2 billion vaccine doses have now been administered across the world. The G7 alone accounts for over 556 million of those, more than a quarter. Leaders have already agreed to commit more than £7 billion to fund an increase in tests, treatments and vaccines around the world. But that still leaves the World Health Organization's programme with a shortfall of more than £16 billion. Africa has had the slowest rollout of any continent, with less than 2% of the population vaccinated. Many countries are reliant on the COVAX scheme for supplies, which have been hit by delays in India. One of the countries in most desperate need of more vaccines is Lesotho, as John Sparks reports.
Behind the doors, in an old corrugated hangar, we found medics and mechanics and a mountain pilot saying a little prayer. For their mission is testing, and their responsibility's great. Millions of people are counting on them. This is a mobile clinic with a doctor and a nurse who provide health care in the Kingdom of Lesotho, a mountainous territory which sits on the roof of southern Africa. And they've been given a critical task. They must deliver COVID-19 vaccines to the nation. But there is a terrible shortage here, and we have to fly 200 kilometers to pick up a couple of dozen jabs. How many doses do you have?
For now, we are having 30 doses.
30?
Yes.
Okay. How many doses are you going to need in total, then?
In total, we'll need, let me estimate, 2 million doses.
2 million doses?
Yes, to be
wow.
at the secure site, yes.
Okay. The fact is, the vast majority in Lesotho are waiting for a vaccine. Tells you something about how precious they are.
For sure, yeah, definitely. There might be a lot of these being made, but like having them here, you know, the process to get them here has just been so long and detailed that it does make them precious.
We flew on to a place called Kubanyani, where key health workers and vulnerable adults have not been protected. And the pilot put us down on the mountainside. Our special cargo was handed over to a nurse, but it won't go far in a district of 10,000 people. How many people have been vaccinated here so far?
So far, 73.
73 people?
Yes, mostly the village health workers and the health center committee. Okay. And some of our colleagues here, staff members.
Okay.
Yes.
You're going to need a lot more.
Especially for the people here, yes.
It is an isolated spot, but the message has gone out about COVID-19 as a third wave of infection in Africa takes root. And we watched as they began to congregate. Why do you want to get a COVID vaccine? Do you think the virus could come here to the mountains? They were gathered in a room, warmed up by the sun, and given the first of a 2-dose vaccine. And the recipients said they were grateful.
Are you one of the lucky people, the fortunate people?
The supply of vaccines in Africa has almost ground to a halt, with the World Health Organization pleading with rich countries to donate their stocks. In some countries, they're talking about vaccinating children now. Here, you're still vaccinating health workers. I wonder, how do you feel about that?
We are not comfortable. Yes, it's not fair at all. It has to be rolled out as quick as possible because this pandemic is killing people.
The kingdom in the mountains has been left behind in the race to vaccinate the public. But as this shape-shifting virus encircles the world, Lesotho should be everybody's responsibility. John Sparks, Sky News in Kubanyani.
Coming up next here on Breakfast, the Duke of Edinburgh would have been 100 years old today. We'll be looking at the best photos of Prince Philip as chosen by the Sun's royal photographer Arthur Edwards, joining us next.
Our job is to tell the truth.
This is a forgotten front line. They are dying here. Here it comes. Cut.
Boy, have we got some interesting ways of showing you what's going on.
Their message to us, get ready.
Nothing like apocalypse.
Instructing you to stay at home.
I can't believe we did that.
It's pretty special, isn't it?
They have breached the road. There is a lot of gas being fired all around us. It is an absolute carnival kind of atmosphere out here for Prime Minister Modi's decisive victory. These students are defying the prohibitory orders, and now they're going to be arrested. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. The roads have been inundated. The only way out is to get people by boat. What is feared that over 200 people might have died because of these landslides. This on any given day would have been bustling with people, but today it's absolutely deserted. This is one of the most sensitive areas of northeast Delhi where there's been clashes. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Hello, my name is Nadia Frontier.
My name is Ryan Matthews. I'm the Marine Assistant at Rotherham Research Station,
Which is to the west of the West Antarctic Peninsula. So far I've been here for 5 months and it is an absolutely wonderful experience.
Did you know symptoms of hay fever can develop at any stage of life, not just in childhood? The Pollen Reports, sponsored by Philips Connected Air Purifiers.
It's a cloudy and mild start across the UK and Ireland, but the cloud will tend to break, especially in the east, to reveal warm spells of sunshine and temperatures widely into the low 20s, maybe peaking at around 26 Celsius. Further north and west, though, we do tend to hang on to quite a lot of cloud and a little bit of light and patchy rain. It's certainly breezier and cooler in the far northwest. Could be the odd shower today across England and Wales, but most places, I think, will escape them. Now, we are looking at a high grass pollen risk across central and southern areas, staying low in the north until the middle of June, and around 95% of hay fever sufferers are allergic to grass pollen, and it's grass and weed pollen that are going to be the main issues at the moment as the peak season approaches.
The Pollen Reports, sponsored by Philips Connected Air Purifiers.
Today would have been the Duke of Edinburgh's 100th birthday. It is just 2 months since he died, and the Queen has marked the occasion by planting a rose named after him. The Prince's philanthropic work is also to be remembered, with the Duke of Edinburgh Awards scheme launching its biggest ever fundraising challenge, as our royal correspondent Rhiannon Mills reports.
In the gardens at Windsor, where they enjoyed so much time together, the Queen had come out to see a tribute to her husband.
Each rose, there's a donation that goes to the Living Legacy Fund, which will help more children engage as well. So it's a beautiful flower in itself, a double flower.
It looks lovely.
Right now, with a cold spring and it all being nature being a little bit behind, it doesn't look so lovely there, but that's what it looks like. So the picture says it all.
Well, that's really fun.
It's just 9 weeks since Prince Philip died at the castle. Before his death, the palace had discussed plans to mark his centenary. But even when he was alive, it was always going to be low-key in the way that he wanted.
The Duke of Edinburgh was never much interested in birthdays, still less being 100. In fact, he didn't even want to live that long. And yet, after he died, we've started this process of reflecting on his contribution. And very much as when Queen Victoria's husband, the Prince Consort, died in 1861, the nation is discovering that, in fact, Prince Philip did a great deal more than people realised.
Like the Duke of Edinburgh Award, their Living Legacy Fund, set up after the Duke's death, has so far raised £500,000. And to keep the momentum going, they're asking everyone, not just young people, to take on their Do It for Youth challenge. Doyeen Sonabar is one of their youth ambassadors, aiming to run a half marathon as part of her challenge. She met Prince Philip.
I have so much gratitude for what he's done, for him creating the scheme. The scheme has been such a great thing, not just for myself, but for millions of young people across the country, even across the world.
COVID meant that crowds were asked to stay away on the day of his funeral. But this summer at Windsor and at the Palace of Holyrood House, there is a chance for people to come and remember him, with exhibitions commemorating the part that Prince Philip played in the coronation, his love of art, his career in the Navy, and showing some of the unusual gifts he received as Britain's longest-serving consort. Since his death, the Queen has carried on with her duties in the way that he would have wanted.
These regimental things.
Like the alliums.
Forever surrounded by reminders of her beloved husband. Rhiannon Mills, Sky News.
A couple of the day's other stories now. The drug company Pfizer says it will donate 500 million doses of COVID vaccine to the US government on a not-for-profit basis. It follows a commitment from President Biden that the US will give vaccines to approximately 100 low-income countries. Around 360,000 people who lost their jobs during lockdown are still unemployed, according to a new study. Citizens Advice says its findings show that changes are needed to universal credit to stop those most affected by the pandemic being left behind. The British Board of Film Classification says parents are increasingly concerned about the amount of swearing in films. It says adults don't want to see offensive language too often because they're worried their children will hear. Well, let's reflect on the political developments of the day. Our political correspondent, Rob Powell, joining us once again from Westminster. Rob, as always, good to see you. Two different topics I think we need to discuss. Mr Hancock and, of course, the G7. Let's start with the former and what could be a pretty bruising encounter with the Select Committee for the Health Secretary.
Yeah, I think so. We don't quite know how long Matt Hancock's appearance in front of the Joint Health and Science Select Committee will last. But remember, when Dominic Cummings sat in front of the same MPs, a fortnight ago, he was there for 7 hours and it was an extraordinary session. I think it seems unlikely, perhaps, that Matt Hancock will be there for quite as long as that. But the MPs will get, I think, a number of hours to go over in detail Mr Hancock's record throughout this pandemic, and I think you can expect some of those revelations from Dominic Cummings to be put to him as well. Clearly, chief among them will be this question over care homes and whether Matt Hancock did indeed promise that all patients, COVID patients being moved from hospitals into care homes at the beginning of the pandemic would be tested. That is what Dominic Cummings says the Health Secretary promised. He says that was one of a number of lies, as he sees it, that Matt Hancock made and says that he should have been fired for it. I think what we will hear from the Health Secretary is that he essentially promised to use his best efforts to test as many people as possible, but there simply weren't enough tests at the time to go around. I think, judging by some of the interviews Mr Hancock's given since then, I remember a doorstep interview on the day that Dominic Cummings gave his evidence, I don't think there is clearly any love lost between the two men. And Matt Hancock, when he is pushed, when he is pressed, is someone that often comes out swinging. So I think when some of the more inflammatory accusations from Mr Cummings are put to Mr Hancock, you can expect a fairly fiery response.
The G7 then, briefly, shall we? And of course, there will be lots of bonhomie, lots of fine words and plenty of talk of this Atlantic Treaty. But in the margins, we do understand that the United States is putting some significant pressure on the UK to sort out the situation as regards the Northern Ireland border.
Yeah, absolutely. Brexit, the sort of spectre haunting another big international gathering, and the question of what is happening with the Northern Ireland Protocol, that mechanism to ensure that the land border on the island of Ireland stays open. What we have heard in the last 24 hours is concern coming from the US side, the US National Security Advisor saying that their side does have concerns over what this means for peace in Northern Ireland. We know that Joe Biden takes his Irish ancestry and his Irish roots very seriously. So it is likely, I think, to be something that is talked about in Cornwall. It may be something, very likely to be something that is brought up when Boris Johnson meets Joe Biden in Cornwall later today. I don't think we should overstate this necessarily, though. Important, though, as it is, and yes, Joe Biden clearly will take this very, very seriously. there are other very, very big issues that need to be discussed. And I think the whole drama, the whole sort of choreography of the day is meant to be Western democracies coming together to say the US is back. And I don't think the US or the UK will want anything, even Brexit, to get in the way of that.
Good. Thanks, Rob. And of course, that committee hearing we were just mentioning, you can watch that from 9:30 here on Sky News.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning. We have more sunshine to come. In fact, it could be a very nice weekend if you like the hot sunshine, that is. A little bit grey this morning across many western areas, but it's a mild start to the day. And the cloud will thin and break a little bit as we go through the weekend. I'll just zoom right back to the beginning there. The graphic's gone a little bit skippy in all this heat. Got the cloud in the west with some rain and drizzle, a little bit more persistent in the far northwest of Scotland. But generally speaking, we're looking at a few showers perhaps across England and Wales as we go through the day today. But I think most places will manage to escape them. So west-east split with the weather, a bit more cloud for windward western coast. Eastern areas, the warm sunshine up to 26, maybe even 27 degrees. So feeling very warm indeed. Just watch out for the odd shower.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.